Some holes in the earth lead to places that should never be found. Welcome to Black Hollow Mine, a scar on the West Virginia mountains. A place where the night shift isn't just a job, it's a vigil. My name is Garrett Miles, and I came here seeking silence, a place to escape my past. Instead, I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest place you've ever been alone at night? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step into the darkness of Black Hollow, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because down here, the silence isn't empty, it sings. The shift begins now. The road to Black Hollow wasn't on any map that valued sanity. It was a jagged tear in the ancient, wrinkled skin of the Appalachians. A path that whispered of places best left undisturbed. My truck, a relic like its driver, juddered over unseen ruts, each lurch a physical punctuation to the litany of failures replaying in my head. The forest pressed close, a dense black-green tapestry that swallowed the fading daylight, leaving only the encroaching gloom. Even the air felt different here, heavy, carrying the scent of perpetual damp, of leaf rot from 1,000 seasons. And beneath it all, a faint, acrid tang. Coal dust, yes, but something else too. Something metallic and bitter, like a secret kept too long underground. It was the taste of regret, stale and suffocating. My name is Garrett Miles, though some days even that feels like a borrowed identity. A worn-out coat I can't quite shed. I was running, not from Canyon, but from the echoing silences where memories took root and festered. The specific silence after the churning gray Atlantic had reclaimed what I'd sworn to protect. The silence where a child's unheard, unheeded cry became the soundtrack to my waking nightmares. Post-traumatic stress, they called it. A neat label for the chaotic, invisible shrapnel lodged in my soul. This job, night watchman at a derelict coal mine, a place already dead and buried, was supposed to be an anesthetic, solitude, an echoing quiet where the only demons were supposed to be the ones I'd chauffeured in myself. A place I'd irrationally hoped, where my failures couldn't hurt anyone new. Black Hollow Mine materialized from the fog-laced twilight more like a geologic extrusion of sorrow than a man-made structure. Skeletal headframes, rusted veins against a bruised sky, clawed, dagging buildings, their windows like vacant eyes, wept creosote tears. It was a monument to forgotten toil and sudden, silent disaster. A single, anemic halogen lamp, buzzing like a trapped insect, cast a jaundiced glow over a surprisingly intact security shack near a sagging chain-link fence. My new vigil station. As I cut the engine, the silence that rushed in was profound, almost a physical pressure. Then, a figure detached itself from the Stygian shadows clinging to the shack's far side, moving with an unsettling economy of motion that didn't stir the damp leaves. Lester Boone. His voice over the phone had been a dry whisper, like stones shifting in a barren creek bed. In person, it was no different. Mr. Miles, it wasn't a question. His eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, seemed to drink the last dregs of light and reflect nothing. He was thin, almost cadaverous, his skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, the color of old parchment. He didn't offer a hand. Place has a way of settling in on a man. Best get used to her moods. Hair. He referred to the mine as if it were a truculent, slumbering beast. He produced a ring of keys. The metal, dark and cold, their faint clinking absorbed instantly by the oppressive quiet. Shacks got what you need. Heat, a chair. Radio might reach the county on a clear night, but help ain't exactly next door. He gestured vaguely toward the gaping maw of the main adit, a blacker hole in the already deepening darkness. Your job's to keep out the curious, vandals, kids thinking it's a dare. Hemlock Realty wants a warm body on site. The abilities, you understand. His lips barely moved, and his gaze never quite settled on me, always slightly past, as if watching something over my shoulder. There was a stillness to him, an unnatural calm that felt older than the mountain. The inside of the shack reeked of mildew, stale cigarette smoke, and that same faint, unsettling metallic tang I'd tasted in the air, stronger here, like an old, unwashed wound. A battered desk, a swiveling chair with a tear-leaking yellowed foam, a logbook. Its previous entries were terse, almost fearful, filled with long gaps. As I set down my thermos, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots like arthritic joints, I saw it, tucked beneath the cracked plastic desk blotter, a single sheet of cheap, ruled paper, creased and yellow with age, as if it had been there for generations. The handwriting was spidery, panicked, dug into the paper, rather than written on it. 3 rules. My heart, a sluggish, heavy thing moments before, gave a painful lurch. 1. Never shine your flashlight down Tunnel 7. Something down there doesn't like the light. A cold sweat broke on my palms. Tunnel 7. The name itself felt like a shard of ice. Boone had meticulously avoided mentioning any specific tunnels. It felt deliberate. I could almost feel the oppressive weight of uncounted tons of rock above that particular unseen passage. 2. When you hear children singing Ring Around the Rosie echoing from the depths, evacuate immediately and don't return for 48 hours. Children singing. The floor seemed to tilt. The scent of salt and diesel filled my nostrils. A phantom trace from that gray, churning water. My breath hitched. This wasn't a prank. The careful, almost ritualistic phrasing, the specificity of the song. It resonated with a primal dread, a childhood fear made real. 3. When all the mine rats start running toward the surface, follow them immediately. Something worse is coming. My hand trembled as I held the paper. The ink seemed to bleed into the yellow, the words almost writhing under the weak light bulb. I looked up, half expecting Boone to be standing there, a grim smile on his face. But the shack was empty. The sound of his ancient truck had long since faded, swallowed by the indifferent forest. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Outside, the wind began its nightly lament, a low, mournful moan through the decaying structures. But this time, it wasn't just wind. Woven into it were other sounds, or the impressions of sounds. A dragging, a faint, rhythmic scraping from somewhere deep within the earth, and a sigh, so faint it could have been the mountain itself exhaling. The rules, the silence, the oppressive presence of this place. This wasn't a job. It was a sentence, and the first long, suffocating hour had only just begun. The first few nights were a masterclass in self-deception. I patrolled the perimeter, the beam of my heavy-duty flashlight, cutting a nervous swathe through the inky blackness, a fragile shield against the suffocating dark. Each snap of a twig, each rustle in the undergrowth, I attributed to mundane creatures of the night. The groan of settling timbers, the drip of water in some forgotten passage, merely the mind breathing, I told myself. But the weight of the place, the sheer, palpable age of the silence within its depths, was a constant, cold pressure against my sanity. Tunnel 7. It was marked on a faded, cellophane-covered map tacked to the shack wall. An angry red X scrawled beside its designation. It branched off the main adit, deeper than the others, plunging into the mountain's guts at a steeper, more unnerving angle. I avoided it, a palpable dread coiling in my stomach whenever my patrol route brought me near its gaping, timber-framed entrance. The air near it was colder, a clammy, tomb-like chill that clung to the skin, and there was a smell, different from the general mine damp, a cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit mixed with something coppery, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Once, driven by a morbid curiosity I instantly regretted, I approached its lip. I didn't shine my light in. The rule screamed in my mind, a frantic, insistent counterpoint to the rational part of my brain that scoffed. But I listened, and I heard it. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. The usual chorus of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the very whisper of the wind, all snuffed out as if a giant hand had clamped over the world. And then, a faint, almost sub-audible slithering, like heavy canvas being dragged over wet stone, from somewhere deep within that lightless void. I backed away, my heart hammering, the taste of bile in my throat. My flashlight beam, when I finally dared to sweep it across the tunnel's mouth from a safer distance, revealed nothing but impenetrable black. Yet, for a fleeting second, I thought I saw impressions. Not shapes, but indentations in the thick dust of the tunnel floor. Too wide, too smooth for any animal I knew. Like something immense had recently passed. It was on the fourth night that I met Ellie Rawlins. I heard the crunch of tires on the access road, an unexpected intrusion. My hand instinctively went to the heavy maglite on my belt. A useless comfort, headlights cut through the trees, and a battered Jeep Wrangler, caked in mud, pulled up near the shack. A woman emerged, no older than late 20s, with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. She wore practical work clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "You must be the new guy," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and steady in the oppressive quiet. She didn't offer a name, just a curt nod. "Ellie Rawlins, I'm here to check the sump pumps, trying to keep the lower levels from completely flooding. Company's gone, but the lawyers still worry about groundwater contamination lawsuits." There was a weariness in her tone that resonated with my own. She didn't seem perturbed by the mine's atmosphere, or if she was, she hid it well. As she gathered some equipment from her Jeep, I found myself asking, against my better judgment, "You ever hear anything unusual out here? See anything?" Ellie paused, one hand on a rusted wrench. Her gaze flickered towards the main adit, then back to me, shrewd and unreadable. "This mountain's old, Mr. Miles. Old places have old stories. Most are just that. Stories." She didn't elaborate, but for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow pass behind her eyes. A flicker of something more than professional detachment. Some tunnels are best left alone, especially 7. Before I could press further, she shouldered her pack. "Won't be long." And with that, she walked towards the main entrance, her own flashlight cutting a defiant path into the darkness. I watched her go, a strange mix of relief and apprehension churning within me. Another human being, but her casual mention of Tunnel 7, the way her voice had subtly deepened, felt less like a warning and more like a confirmation of the unholy dread that particular passage inspired. Later, as I did my rounds, I found a small, tarnished silver locket near the barricaded entrance to a collapsed sub-tunnel, not far from the path to 7. It was empty, its clasp broken, as if it had been recently, and violently, torn from someone's neck. The locket gnawed at me. It felt too personal, too intimate for a place this desolate to simply cough up. I kept it in my pocket. Its cold weight a constant, unsettling reminder. The succeeding nights were threaded with an increasing tension. I started hearing things. Distinct whispers that seemed to ride the drafts, snaking from the mind's deeper recesses. Words in English, too quick, too faint to grasp, always vanishing when I tried to focus. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, more defined now, less easily dismissed as tricks of light and fatigue. The air in the shack, despite the buzzing heater, grew colder, the metallic tang more pronounced, joined by a faint but pervasive odor of something like spoiled meat. Lester Boone had made no further appearances, which was both a relief and a source of disquiet. His silence felt more ominous than any overt threat. I tried calling the number he'd left for Hemlock Realty once, just to hear a human voice, to report the unease. It rang endlessly in a void of static. It was nearly 3 a.m. on my 7th night. A thick, cloying fog pressing in from the forest, muffling all sound, when the second rule asserted its terrible dominion. Ring Around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies. The sound was faint at first, a tiny, tinny melody threaded through the fog, like music from a distant broken ice cream truck. My blood turned to ice water. It was a child's voice, or more accurately, several children's voices, singing in a high, reedy, unnervingly discordant chorus. It was coming from the mine, deep within. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The voices grew louder, clearer, echoing up from the earth itself, each note laced with an unutterable sorrow, a chilling, playful malevolence. It wasn't just singing, it was a summons. My legs felt like lead. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to run, to obey the handwritten scrawl on that damn piece of paper. But the PTSD, the ghost of that other child's voice, rooted me to the spot. This was different, I tried to tell myself. This wasn't real, but it felt real. The air vibrated with it. The melody seemed to seep into my bones, cold and insidious. I stumbled out of the shack, my flashlight beam trembling, pointing it towards the main adit. The singing swelled, closer now, as if its sources were moving, ascending. And then I saw her, or thought I saw her. Ellie Rawlins, standing at the gaping mouth of the mine, her back to me, her head cocked as if listening intently. "Ellie," I croaked, my voice a dry rasp. She didn't turn. The children's voices swirled around her, around me, a vortex of innocent horror. "Get out," the rules screamed silently. 48 hours. I took a step towards her, then another. "Ellie, we have to leave. Don't you hear it?" And then she did turn, slowly. Her face was pale in my flashlight beam, her eyes wide and unfocused. But it wasn't Ellie. Not quite. There was a slackness to her features, a subtle, horrifying wrongness in the tilt of her head, the slight, unnatural curve of her lips, almost a smile. And behind her eyes, something ancient and alien flickered. Panic, cold and absolute, finally broke through my paralysis. I grabbed her arm. It was icy cold like marble. "Ellie, snap out of it." She didn't resist, but she didn't respond either. The singing intensified, a deafening, disorienting cacophony. I half-dragged, half-carried her back towards my truck, the melody seeming to claw at my ears, trying to pull us back. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and slammed the truck into reverse, gravel spraying as I tore away from Black Hollow, the children's mournful, mocking refrain chasing us into the fog-choked darkness. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the cab punctuated only by my ragged breathing, and Ellie's shallow, almost inaudible gasps. It wasn't until we hit the main highway, the first signs of distant, normal light pollution staining the horizon, that she seemed to deflate. A long, shuddering sigh escaped her, and she blinked, looking around as if waking from a deep, disturbing dream. "Garrett?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What? What happened? Where are we?" She had no memory of the singing, of being at the mine entrance, only a vague recollection of feeling intensely cold, of a lullaby she couldn't quite place. I didn't press. I couldn't. The 48 hours stretched before us, a period of forced exile filled with an unspoken shared terror. We found a dingy motel. The next day, I tried to find Frank Devereaux. I found him nursing a cheap whiskey in a dimly lit local bar. His eyes, when I mentioned Black Hollow and the singing, went distant and clouded with a fear so profound it was almost palpable. "You heard the choir, son," he rasped, his voice thick with something more than alcohol. "Damn kids. They always want more voices for their song. He pushed a crumpled napkin across the sticky bar top towards me. On it, crudely drawn in smudged pencil, was a partial map of the mine's older, less documented sections. A jagged line pointed towards an area near Tunnel 7. Beside it, a single shaky word. Listen. The 48 hours crawled by, each minute an agony of suspense. Ellie, though physically recovered, was haunted. She'd call me, her voice tight, asking if I was sure about what I'd heard, what I'd seen. The experience had shaken her carefully constructed pragmatism to its core. We met at a greasy spoon diner, the forced normalcy of coffee and stale donuts a thin veneer over our shared dread. She confessed then about her father, one of the miners lost in the '87 disaster in Tunnel 7. The company had called it a methane explosion, a tragic accident. But there were whispers, inconsistencies. No bodies ever recovered, not one. Frank Devereaux. Crude map was less a guide and more a riddle. It depicted shafts and crawl spaces not on the official schematics. Areas sealed off long before the '87 incident, marked with cryptic symbols. An eye, a spiral, a crude stick figure with arms outstretched. The urge to return, to understand, was a poisonous itch, battling the primal instinct to run and never look back. That single smudged word, listen, what did it mean? When we finally drove back to Black Hollow, the fog had lifted, but the atmosphere was, if anything, more oppressive. A heavy, expectant silence blanketed the mine. As we cautiously approached the main adit, the first thing we noticed was the circle, drawn in chalky white dust, or perhaps powdered stone. Right where Ellie had stood was a perfect child-sized ring around the Rosie's circle, complete with crude stick figures dancing. It hadn't been there before. My blood ran cold. Lester Boone was nowhere to be seen. The shack was as I'd left it, the air thick with disuse. His continued absence was a gaping hole in the unfolding dread, a silence more eloquent than any threat. Was he part of this? A victim? Or something else entirely? Driven by a desperate need for answers, and armed with Frank's map, Ellie's knowledge of mine structures, and a growing sense of fatalism, we decided to venture deeper than I had before. Not into Tunnel 7. The mere thought still sent shivers down my spine, but into some of the older, adjacent workings marked on Frank's map, hoping to find something. Records, journals, anything to explain the madness. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. The deeper we went, the beam of my flashlight seemed to be swallowed by the darkness just a few feet ahead. The walls, slick with moisture, felt wrong. They seemed to absorb sound, to breathe. I ran my hand along one section, and the rock felt strangely pliant, almost like cold flesh. Ellie, usually so stoic, kept glancing over her shoulder, her face pale. It was in a small, forgotten foreman's office, a crumbling brick alcove off a secondary passage, that we found them. Stacked in a rotted wooden crate were old employee ledgers, shift reports, disciplinary write-ups, all dating back decades, some even predating the 1950s modernizations. Most were mundane. But then Ellie let out a small stifled gasp. She held up a thin, leather-bound journal. The ink was faded, the handwriting spidery. It belonged to a shift supervisor from the late 1940s. His early entries were routine. Then they grew, agitated. He wrote of strange sounds, of miners complaining about seeing things in the deep shafts, of a whispering sickness that made men paranoid and violent. He mentioned Tunnel 7 specifically, calling it the bad place, a section where tools would disappear and lanterns would inexplicably extinguish. One entry, dated just before he apparently quit or vanished. His records ended abruptly, sent a fresh spear of ice through me. Heard the singing again last night. Not the children this time. Something older. Something hungry. It's calling them from 7. Boone's boy, young Lester. He hears it too. Says it promises things. Says the mountain wants its due. Lester Boone. Not Boone's boy anymore, but the name linked to that almost 70-year-old terror, to Tunnel 7, to the singing. It tightened a cold knot in my gut. Just then, a sound echoed from further down the main tunnel towards the surface. A high-pitched, frantic squeaking, thousands of them, followed by a scrabbling, a rushing, like a furry, chittering tide. The rats. The third rule slammed into my consciousness with the force of a physical blow. When all the mine rats start running toward the surface, follow them immediately. Something worse is coming. We looked at each other, eyes wide with dawning horror. The ground beneath our feet gave a low, almost imperceptible tremor, and from the direction of Tunnel 7, a sound began to build. Not singing this time, but a deep, resonant hum, like a colossal intake of breath. Something vast and ancient was stirring in the deep dark. The hum vibrated through the soles of our boots, through the very rock around us. A sound so low, it was felt as much as heard. A thrumming, primeval resonance that spoke of unimaginable mass and ancient, slumbering power. The scrabbling of the rats intensified, a river of panicked, furry bodies. They weren't just fleeing, they were stampeding, a tide of instinctual terror pouring past us, up the slight incline of the passage towards the distant promise of moonlight. Their tiny claws scrabbled against the damp stone, a sound like a million dry leaves skittering in a storm. Some cannoned into our legs, their small bodies trembling, heedless of us in their desperate flight. "We need to go." Ellie's voice was a choked whisper, her face ashen in the bouncing light from my helmet lamp. Now, Garrett, for a moment, I was frozen. The implications of the third rule, the journal entry, Lester Boone's name echoing in the cacophony of my mind. Then, another tremor, stronger this time, dislodged a shower of dust and small pebbles from the low ceiling. The deep hum intensified, resolving into something akin to a monstrous guttural sigh, an exhalation that seemed to draw the very air from our lungs. It was the sound of something immense uncoiling in the lightless depths. We turned and ran, stumbling over uneven ground, our flashlights carving frantic arcs through the oppressive blackness. The rats were our unwilling guides, a desperate, chittering current, leading us towards the mine entrance. Behind us, the character of the sound from Tunnel 7 was changing. The hum was now overlaid with a faint, melodic series of clicks and deep, wet rustlings, as if colossal, unseen mechanisms were grinding into place, or something vast and segmented was stirring, dragging its bulk through the lightless passages. As we neared the junction where Tunnel 7 branched off, the air grew colder, almost painfully so. The sweet, cloying smell I'd noticed before was overpowering now, thick and nauseating, like a charnel house disguised as an orchard. My flashlight beam, against every screaming instinct, flickered towards the yawning abyss of Tunnel 7's entrance. What I saw was not a what, but a how. The darkness within wasn't just an absence of light. It was a living, viscous entity. It seemed to breathe, to pulse with a faint internal luminescence, like bioluminescent algae in an abyssal trench. And within that pulsing darkness, shapes resolved and dissolved. Long, pale, worm-like segments, shifting and coiling around each other, too vast to be comprehended, too alien to be believed. It was not one thing, but many, a collective undulating horror. The source of the humming, the clicking, the buried choir in its raw, chthonic form. A guttural scream tore from Ellie's throat. She stumbled, her ankle twisting. I hold her up, adrenaline afire in my veins. "Don't look, keep moving." And then blocking our path to the main added, standing as calmly as if awaiting a train, was Lester Boone. He wasn't the frail, reedy man I'd first met. Or he was. but something had solidified him. His pale eyes glowed with a faint, reflected luminescence, the same sickly light that pulsed from Tunnel 7. He held a strange, tarnished silver whistle in one hand, its surface carved with unsettling spiral patterns. He was smiling, a thin, bloodless curve of his lips that held no warmth, only a terrifying, proprietary satisfaction. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Miles. And Miss Rawlins." His voice was different too. Still quiet, but infused with an unnatural resonance, like the hum from the depths. "The performance is just about to begin. The overture, you might say." "Boone, get out of the way," I yelled, shoving Ellie slightly behind me. The rats were now a frantic, receding tide, disappearing up the main passage. We were almost out. He raised the silver whistle. "The mountain always claims its due, Mr. Miles. It always has. It's a simple arrangement. A few voices for the quiet. A little company for those who sleep below." Ellie let out a choked gasp, fury and horror warring on her face. You were there. In 87, you monster." Boone's smile widened, a rictus of inhuman amusement. "Monster? I am merely the conductor, Miss Rawlins. I ensure the choir has what it needs. Prevents disharmony." He took a step towards us, the air around him shimmering, and it has been so very hungry. The old songs grow stale. The old songs grow stale. From behind him, out of the Stygian blackness of Tunnel 7, the singing began. Not just the children this time. A multitude of voices, a discordant, terrifying symphony of male and female tones, young and old, an overlapping chorus of pain, confusion, and an unholy, eternal hunger. It pressed in on us, a physical weight crawling under the skin, trying to find purchase in the secret, fearful places of the mind. I heard that child's voice again, clearer now, woven into the monstrous harmony, calling my name, beckoning. "It wants fresh voices, Garrett," Boone rasped, his eyes flaring with that sickly internal light. "And you, with your particular sorrows, you have a powerful resonance. A solo, perhaps." He lifted the whistle to his lips, but before he could blow, a strangled cry echoed from a side passage, one we hadn't explored, a passage that Frank Devereaux's crude map had marked with a stark, underlined "New." Dr. Marlena Keats stumbled into view, her clothes torn, her face streaked with grime and tears, her eyes wide with a terrifying, ecstatic light. "Down there. She's waiting." She pointed a trembling finger towards Tunnel 7, towards the pulsing, geometric nightmare and the cacophony of lost souls. Boone turned, his smile faltering for an instant, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "It was the opening we needed. Now, Ellie," I roared. I shoved Ellie hard towards the narrower, less used passage that Frank's map had vaguely indicated as a potential, if dangerous, alternative route to an old air shaft. As she scrambled away, I turned to face Boone, my maglite held like a club. He was already turning back, his face contorted in a mask of cold fury. The silver whistle was at his lips, but instead of a note, a piercing electronic shriek cut through the unholy chorus. Frank Devereaux, his face a mask of grim determination, stood at the junction of another side tunnel, a small, jury-rigged device in his hand, a tangle of wires, a battery, and what looked like an old emergency klaxon. He'd ripped it from somewhere. The sound was deafening, painfully high-pitched, aimed directly at the entrance to Tunnel 7. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The pulsing light within the tunnel stuttered, the swirling shapes recoiling as if struck. The chorus of voices fractured, dissolving into a cacophony of shrieks and pained groans, a sound like 1,000 souls being torn apart. Boone clapped his hands over his ears, his face contorting in agony, the silver whistle clattering to the stone floor. Even Dr. Keats, momentarily jolted from her trance, whimpered and cowered. "Run, damn you!" Frank yelled, his voice tight with strain, his hand white-knuckling the device. "This ain't gonna hold it for long. It hates the noise, the wrong noise." The old scar on his arm, I saw now, was a series of faded circular burns, almost like ritualistic markings. Boone, recovering, lunged for the whistle. I met him halfway, bringing the mag light down in a savage arc. It connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud. He stumbled, but didn't go down, his eyes burning with an inhuman ferocity. He was stronger than he looked, unnaturally so. The ground beneath us heaved. The high-pitched shriek from Frank's device wavered as rocks began to rain down from the ceiling, the entire passage groaning under an immense unseen pressure. The buried choir was fighting back. Frank screamed, a sharp, terrible sound, as a large section of the roof brougham gave way, burying him in a shower of rock and debris. The makeshift klaxon fell silent. The oppressive, multi-voiced hum from Tunnel 7 instantly surged back, stronger, angrier. Boone, ignoring his injured shoulder, scrambled for the whistle. There was no time. I turned and plunged into the darkness of the passage Ellie had taken, hoping Frank's sacrifice, his knowledge of the mind's true nature, hadn't been in vain. Behind me, I heard Boone's triumphant, chilling laugh, followed by the first, piercing note of the silver whistle, a sound that promised an eternity of cold, suffocating darkness and an endless, sorrowful song. The passage Ellie had taken was a nightmare of collapsing timbers and loose scree. It was narrower, older, the air thick with the chute choking dust of ages. The metallic tang was stronger here, mingling with the scent of wet, disturbed earth. Behind us, the piercing note of Boone's silver whistle cut through the cacophony, a clear, purposeful sound that seemed to slither down the tunnels, seeking us. It wasn't just a sound. I could feel it, a cold, invasive pressure in my skull, urging me to turn back, to join the chorus. "Ellie, this way!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. She was a few yards ahead, scrambling over a pile of fallen rock that blocked half the tunnel. I could hear her ragged breathing, punctuated by small pained whimpers. The groaning of the mine was constant now, not just tremors, but a deep structural agony, as if the mountain itself were trying to shrug off the abomination in its heart. Water began to seep from cracks in the walls, quickly turning into trickles, then rivulets, cold and black. "The air shaft," Frank's map, Ellie gasped, pointing a trembling finger towards a barely discernible opening higher up on the tunnel wall, partially obscured by a fall of rock. "It should lead up." The whistle sounded again, closer now, its melody weaving through the terrifying harmonies of the buried choir, which seemed to be drawing nearer, even as the tunnel around us threatened to collapse. I could feel the individual voices now, insidious whispers trying to find the cracks in my resolve, promising an end to pain, promising belonging. I saw, for a horrifying instant, the face of the child I couldn't save, his eyes wide, beckoning me from the darkness ahead. "Garrett!" Ellie's cry, sharp with genuine fear for me, cut through the hallucinatory haze. We clawed our way up the loose rock, dislodging more debris with every movement. The opening was small, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Ellie went first, wriggling into the oppressive blackness. I pushed from below, then followed, the rock scraping against my back, the sound of Boone's whistle, and the choir's unearthly song seeming to claw at my heels. The air shaft was a claustrophobic chimney of rough-hewn rock and rusted iron rungs, slick with mineral-laced water and something else, something foul and organic. It was a vertical ascent into suffocating darkness, our only guide the faint hope that it led to the surface. Below, the sounds of the enraged choir grew muffled, but Boone's whistle, that damn whistle, seemed to pierce through stone and earth, a relentless, searching tendril of sound. Each rung was an agony. Our muscles screamed, our lungs burned. Once, my foot slipped on a slime-coated rung, and I dangled precariously, the abyss yawning below, the chorus seeming to surge in triumph. Ellie, her face a mask of terror, in the brief upward flash of my lamp, reached down, her grip surprisingly strong, and hauled me back. It felt like hours. The air grew thinner, colder, but then a faint, almost imperceptible draft touched my face, and with it, another scent. Pine needles, damp earth, the clean, sharp smell of the world above. Almost. There, Ellie choked out. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, we pulled ourselves up and over the lip of the shaft, collapsing onto a carpet of wet leaves and pine needles. We were out on the mountainside, bathed in the indifferent pre-dawn gray. The entrance to the air shaft was little more than a ragged hole in the ground, almost invisible amidst a tangle of rhododendron bushes. Behind us, from the direction of the main mine entrance, a deep, guttural roar of frustrated fury echoed through the forests, followed by a series of sickening, wet, tearing sounds, as if the very mountain were ripping itself apart in a final, cataclysmic spasm. Then, an unearthly, profound silence fell, a silence more terrifying than all the noise that had preceded it. Even the normal forest sounds, birds, insects, seemed to hold their breath. We lay there gasping for a long time. The world felt unreal, distant. The horrors below, too vivid. Finally, Ellie stirred. Boone? Frank? Keats? I shook my head, the truth a cold, heavy stone in my gut. I don't know. But Frank knew. He knew what that thing hated, the memory of his sacrifice. The raw courage in his eyes burned. We stumbled down the mountainside, away from Black Hollow, away from the unnatural silence. We didn't look back. When we finally reached a ranger station hours later, our story, a garbled, half-coherent tale of sibilant darkness, impossible creatures, and a man who conducted a choir of the dead, was met with pitying stares and concerned murmurs about exposure and traumatain. The official report, when it eventually came out weeks later, after a cursory and very cautious geological survey, would speak of a catastrophic structural failure within the long-abandoned Black Hollow mine, likely triggered by minor seismic activity. All access points were declared permanently sealed due to extreme instability. No mention of bodies, no mention of singing. The weeks that followed were a blur of sterile hospital rooms, skeptical police officers, and the heavy, uncomprehending sympathy of strangers. Ellie and I clung to each other, two survivors adrift in a sea of normalcy that now felt utterly alien. The shared trauma was a raw, invisible bond nobody else could see or understand. My PTSD was different now. The old ghosts were still there, but they were quieter, overshadowed by the fresh, colder horrors of Black Hollow. The child's voice I used to hear was sometimes joined by a faint, discordant chorus, the opening bars of a song I prayed I'd never hear in full again. They tried to tell us we'd imagined it, mass hysteria brought on by stress and the mine's disorienting environment. Boone, they said, had likely been a squatter, a disturbed individual who'd perished in the collapse he might have inadvertently triggered. Dr. Keats, a tragic academic who had wandered off and become lost. Frank Devereaux, simply a local eccentric who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Neat explanations for an untidy, unbelievable horror. But we knew the stale scent of the choir's breath, the icy touch of Boone's gaze, the way the very rock of the mountain had seemed to writhe with malevolent life. Life, eventually, had to go on. Ellie moved away, to the coast, seeking the open sky and the cleansing scent of salt water, as far from the claustrophobic embrace of the mountains as she could get. We kept in touch, our calls infrequent, a reluctant picking at a shared, unhealing wound. She told me once, her voice small and distant, that sometimes, when the tide was out and the wind was just right, she thought she could hear a faint, reedy melody carried on the ocean breeze, like a broken music box lost at sea. I tried to rebuild. I found a quiet job, stocking shelves at a 24-hour hardware store in a town far from any mountains, any mines. The nights were the worst. Every settling creak of my small apartment building, every sigh of the wind, threatened to resolve into that familiar, dreaded tune. I avoided silence. I slept with the radio on, a meaningless babble of talk shows and static my only defense. One rainy Tuesday morning, about a year after Black Hollow, I was Canyon newspaper, waiting for my coffee. A small article on page 6 caught my eye. A local human interest piece from a rural county in Kentucky, several states away from West Virginia. It was about a string of recent unexplained disappearances near an old, supposedly dormant cave system, one recently acquired by an anonymous development corporation with ambitious plans. The locals, the article said, had old stories about the caves, legends of strange sounds, people who went in and never came out. One, a local historian. A kindly old woman mentioned a recurring detail in the folklore, a specific, unsettling lullaby sometimes heard echoing from the deepest chambers. Ring Around the Rosie, she'd called it. The article even quoted a newly appointed site manager, a Mr. L. Beaumont, a quiet, unassuming man recently arrived from out of state, who assured the community that all safety precautions were being taken. I dropped the coffee. My hands were shaking. Beaumont. Boone. The names, so similar. The pattern, so chillingly familiar. The choir was hungry, and it appeared it was still recruiting conductors. I looked out the window at the anonymous city street, at the oblivious faces hurrying through the rain. The melody, faint but unmistakable, began to weave its way through the static of the cafe's cheap radio. Ashes. Ashes. This time, it wasn't just in my head. It was out there. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the song had never truly ended. It had only paused. And somewhere, in the deep dark, the conductor was waiting to begin the next verse. And I, and God knows how many others, were just unwilling notes in Black Hollow's unending, sorrowful lullaby. Black Hollow holds its secrets deep underground. Garrett Miles learned that some rules are the only things standing between you and the darkness. The children's choir. Its song isn't just a melody, it's a summons. The conductor may be gone, but the music lingers. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the chilling final verse. The twist that reveals the true, terrifying reach of Black Hollow's influence. The last few moments will leave you questioning what you hear. What do you think the buried choir is? What was Boone's true purpose? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night at Black Hollow Mine, if the singing hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Because some lullabies, they're meant to put you to sleep forever. And the song, it's always playing.